Bim Avalami.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and it is such a pleasure to follow what was quite a wonderful speech from my honourable friend, the member for North Dorset. And I was roused to get up when he mentioned, Trumpian Singaporeization, liberalising, and I thought, that sounds like me, and I must now rise in my remarks. I think that it is clear that we are not at this moment where we would have loved to have been a couple of years ago. My honourable friend has mentioned already, it has been alluded to by many others so far, that due to various political events over the last 12 months or so, we hadn't made as much progress on this agenda as we would have liked. And I say to some members on my own side that, of course, it would have been better if this process had moved faster. But we are where we are. Now, when faced with such a scenario, the government has a choice. The government could either say, no, political machismo demands that we keep going down a route, even if we fear that that route by the end of 31st of December may lead to some negative or lot of negative outcomes, or the government takes a grown-up approach, the sort of approach that in a sensible debate members of the opposition would much more readily accept and highlight explicitly, which is we will do what we can now, remove the sunset clause, and in an orderly way make sure that we get this right. Because I remember when I was a child, and there were all those adverts about, a dog is not for, it's not just for Christmas, it's for life. And these laws passed in this House are for life. We intend to get this right for the long term. And that's why, fundamentally, the government's approach of repealing roughly about 2,000 laws by the end of this year, with the further 3,000 to be done in a sensible way, in a structured way, in a strategic way, to improve our regulatory system. And I should have said at the top, Mr. Deputy Speaker, my register of interest as chair of the Regulatory Reform Group. I was very taken by the speech by my honourable friend. Oh, of course.
Whilst there may be arguments for removing the sunset clause, nevertheless there is a real fear that without the sunset clause, the government could have, for various reasons, fallen back on the promises which it made about reviewing all of the laws. And that's why the amendment is so important, that there will be a continuous review and a continuous picture of where the government is going, and people can ensure that the foot is not lifted off the pedal.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his comment, and indeed he's entirely right. It is a very good example of our parliamentary democracy working well, that there has been dialogue, both open and privately, between members of this House and the government to get to a right point on amendments that will say, yes, we're going to support the government in broad terms, but there is a need and a desire to get more reporting, more explicit signalling of where the government's going, to make sure that Whitehall as a whole continues with this agenda and does not feel that, well, we've got this bill done, we're just going to leave it all for years to come. And I think I understand exactly what he says. What I would also say, to remark on some of the Lord's amendments, is, I am impatient, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I don't know if this is always common to politicians, but I'm a very impatient person.
You are.
Thank you. I thank the honourable gentleman member for North Dorset for confirming that to the House. And I'm an impatient person. And so I'm impatient as somebody who has talked a lot over the last few months in particular about strengthening and improving our regulatory system, getting more scrutiny for our regulators as they take decisions, getting more ability of this House to scrutinise the decisions taken in our name. I'm impatient that we aren't doing more of this faster. But I also recognise that we need to do this in a way that not just looks at the EU law. Indeed, the honourable member, the member for Stone, in his speech, in his remarks earlier, was talking about the danger of maybe having one set of EU regulations and then the rest of law in another set. Actually, it's so important that as we deal with European-derived law, we incorporate this into our full body of law in a strategically sensible way that improves our regulatory system, not just a cut-and-paste job, as may have happened. And I fear that a lot of the Lord's amendments are really about finding times to delay, finding ways to delay the process that the government has rightly, strategically and politically committed to doing. And I think the Honourable Member, the Member for Orpington, made that point very well in his speech, and I won't repeat it. I would, however, like to just, as I come to my closing remarks, just talk a little bit about Lord's Amendment 15, which relates to various environmental issues. And I have many problems with it. I think that first, the notion that it is always clear whether one is either reducing or increasing what the regulation, what the amendment claims to be the level of environmental protection or the level of protection of consumers. I think that that is something that's very hard to do. I think that it deliberately adds a huge amount of delay and bureaucracy to the entire process. And it elevates the Office of Environmental Protection, which, as if I remember rightly, and though somebody I'm sure will correct me, is actually meant to be an advisory body, not a body meant to impose regulations on this House or anywhere else. So it's actually elevating the Office for Environmental Protection to do a job that it was not encouraged to do, which it was not designed to do, and is a very good example of the sort of regulatory creep that we are continually seeing and that I am campaigning and fighting against in this House. And so I think that this amendment is very dangerous for that reason. It has already been said very accurately and amusingly by my honourable friends, the member for Chelmsford and indeed for North Dorset, about the political insanity of weakening things that the public wants and weakening things completely contrary to the broad direction of our policy, which is the Biodiversity Net Gain, which is the Environment Act, the Agriculture Act, the Fisheries Bill. All of these things that we have done as a government over the last few years, it would be insane to then, in relation to particular regulations, go back on all the things that we have done. So this is not a clear and present danger to our environment. And what I would finish by saying, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is that I have a feeling, a bit like the member for Chelmsford, that this amendment isn't really about what it says on the tin. It's really about trying to create these wedge points that can be used to generate emails by 38 Degrees or create Facebook ads or clips to somehow try and suggest that Conservative members are not in favour of environmental protection. I think this is dangerous. I think this House should not be used in this way. I've seen it grow in my time in Parliament, both from Labour and the Liberal Democrats in particular. And I would say that we should not allow this House to sometimes just be a place where people put down motions intending for just to try and incorrectly embarrass members simply to suggest that they're not in favour of something which they are in favour of. I would make that point as I sit down, and I will support the government in all divisions today.